So the language is probably my favorite thing, really, just learning the language. My trainer was actually huge into that, and he passed that on to me. It's just really, just digging into the language, because that's really at the core of Norwegian values. They love their language. It's special to them. It's, their thing that separates them from the rest of the world. Like, no one else speaks Norwegian. There's like 5 million people that do, and that's it. And they're really happy about that. I'd say one of the hardest things, going from American English to Norwegian is getting the vowel sounds down. It seems like something that's really basic, but our American vowels sound a lot different from their Norwegian vowels. And, just learning a second language, you pick up on that a lot sooner. I'd say that's the main thing, too, that separates, someone who's been speaking Norwegian for a long time as compared to, someone who just barely got to Norway. Is, how accurate can you get the vowel sounds? Another kind of cool thing is Norwegian for me. I tried to learn Spanish a lot in high school, spent 3 years, and it was absolutely gone after my third week in the MTC. I can still pick it up just a little bit, but I can't speak it like hardly at all. Norwegian for me was actually a lot easier to learn than Spanish. There's a few cool things about it that make it easier. There's some things with the grammar that make it a little tricky, but as far as, just like in Spanish, every verb you use, you have to, conjugate it to like, okay, he's saying this, he's doing that, or like I'm doing this, I forget the specific grammar term for it. But in Norwegian, the verb is the verb and that's it. Like all you have to do is future, past, and present tense, and other than that, doesn't matter who's saying it, that's the verb, you use it. And so that made it really easy. I'd say, yeah, becoming conversational in Norwegian doesn't take a long time. You can learn the words and just kind of use them. And, putting sentences together is a lot like English. There's just a couple things that you have to flip around. But other than that, like English to Norwegian turns out really well. I think, yeah, like one of my buddies said, like there's a ton of dialects all over the place. And, at the start of your mission, that can be a little intimidating because it sounds like, at the start, like there's a different language for every area you go to, but you learn it's more just kind of accents. There's a few different words they use. So that's the thing. In Norway, yeah, there's a lot of dialects. And I think in most countries too, you kind of get that, different people sound different from over here than they do over there. And with Norway, it just kind of got really extreme because the country's so long, like north to south, to where people got really isolated and they really started talking different from each other. And so, yeah, at the start of your mission, it seems like there's a different language for almost every area you go to. But towards the end of your mission, it all makes sense a little bit more. It all flows a little bit more. It seems like, okay, it's more so just an accent, really, instead of, a completely different language. And that's where it really, becomes a dialect. They use different words. And it's really, just kind of basic things. Like, I remember in my last area, they had a special word for the garbage. And, it was different from anywhere else in Norway, but still, like, you could recognize it if you were just speaking in Norwegian. Mostly out of the context, you can catch it. Other than that, in Norwegian, there's 2, like, main written forms that they have. There's, like, the traditional book language kind of written area, and then they tried to take all the dialects and kind of throw them all together and make this new written form that looks like it's a dialect kind of written. And it's called New Norwegian. And it's really interesting. It's actually really fun to read. And the Norwegians kind of looked at it for a little bit, and they didn't like it. And then when they tried to get rid of it, they're like, wait, it makes us special. We like it. We're going to keep it. And so that's just kind of an interesting thing about Norway is you don't have a lot of countries where they have 2 written forms. I mean, you'll have some, like with Chinese, you'll have traditional and then the new reformed stuff. But other than that, like, I thought that was a really cool thing about the language. They really just, overall, Norwegians love it. They geek out about their language.
It seems really intimidating because it's closer to Finland, the country is, and everyone hears about how hard Finnish is. So when I got my call to Norway, everyone was saying, oh, like, you're going to have such a hard time learning that language. But in reality, I didn't feel like it was that difficult. Obviously, learning a new language is hard no matter what language it is, but there's a lot of similarities to English, and it's a Germanic language. So if you have any connections to German, learning Norwegian won't be as difficult. The grammar is not, it's different than English, but it's not as difficult as you may think. It's very simple. There's very few rules, but the one rule, or the few rules that they do have, are pretty easy to mess up. And so as long as you focus on learning those basic rules, then the grammar is not that hard. The hardest thing about learning Norwegian is the pronunciation. It's very easy to speak grammatically perfect Norwegian, but sound 100% like an American. And that's one thing that a lot of missionaries struggle with, is getting the pronunciation right. So they'll understand you, but they'll know right off the bat that you're an American, and that's something that most Norwegian missionaries, especially that are American, get frustrated with, because we all want to master the language, but getting those pronunciations things down is really hard. And one of the reasons for that is that there are so many dialects in Norwegian that they just tweak the pronunciation just a little bit, that it's hard to master one set of Norwegian dialect. But that's one of my favorite things about the Norwegian language, is the dialects, because depending on how someone speaks, you can understand and determine where they're from. So the west coast of Norway, you can hear a lot of like the guttural, like scarring of the R's, and then in Oslo they roll the R's. That's kind of the general thing, where you can tell at least what part of Norway they're from, and that was really interesting to see. And a lot of Norwegian missionaries try and pick up some of the dialects, and that kind of, it becomes a fun game to see, what missionaries are learning what dialect, and it's fun because we can all understand each other. It's not different enough where it's a new language, but it's just different enough to make it unique, and I thought that was really fun.
So I primarily served in the west and the north in Norway. And I generally split up Norway as the west, north, and east. All over TV and radio, they speak Eastern Norwegian. And to describe Eastern Norwegian, it sounds very sing-songy, very light. If you've ever heard the Swedish Chef from the Muppets and how he goes do-do-do-do-do-do, it's a little bit like that. I generally tried to hold an Eastern dialect because since it's on TV and radio, everyone could understand me if I spoke that dialect. In the West, they have different words for things than, compared to the East. However, their pronunciation is the most difficult part. And so they take their R's and they scar them, meaning if you think of a German R, they have it back in their throat. They do that with all of their R's in the West. And that can be very difficult for some missionaries who have been taught by MTC teachers that are speaking Eastern dialect. So that's something to get used to. Northern dialect has a special place in my heart. I served both winters up in the north, which was a difficult experience, but I have such warm feelings towards it. Northerners generally speak more slowly and more comfortably, it seems, but also it's more nasal. It's more forward in the nose. Like, for example, one of our favorite phrases from the north is "I come fra Buda," which means I come from Buddha, but it's a very nasally, somewhat Asian sounding dialect. Yeah, that's the north. Okay, so this is probably going to sound terrible because I know that all my Norwegian friends are going to be listening to this, and yeah, they're going to think that was a terrible Western dialect. I'll say, yeah, you're right. Okay, so I will say I come from Bergen in Norwegian, in the three dialects. Okay, so in the Eastern dialect, I would say Jeg kommer fra Bergen, which would be a total lie, because if you're from Bergen, you're very proud of your dialect. If you're actually from Bergen, you'd say Jeg kommer fra Bergen. I'll say that again, just in case. Jeg kommer fra Bergen. And then in the north, you would say Jeg kom fra Bergen. Jeg kom fra Bergen. That's close enough. Yeah. North dialect, they chop their words in half, it seems. It's a little lazier, for example. Like if I were to say, jeg kommer fra, which means I come from, that is the Eastern dialect. But in Northern dialect, they would just say, jeg kom fra, instead of jeg kommer fra. And there was a really old man in northern Norway that he would talk about, he had a very thick fisherman's dialect. Sweetest man in the world. He was so nice. But he would talk about, ja, det var vinteren i 99, og vi hadde, det var 27 grader, og vi hadde 7 meter snø. He would just talk about how cold it was, and the snow, and the terrible fish prices. I love talking to that old man. Anyway, yeah, there's some.